I just want to welcome everybody to the session of identity. This presentation session is a presentation session, so we'll be hearing from multiple groups throughout the session, and we have a designated time for questions and answers towards the end of the session. And now, please allow me to introduce you to the first presenter for this session, lovely Dizon. Get that right, from the University of Auckland, speaking about inviting Southeast Asian young people to be fully known in New Zealand. So can we have a big round of applause, please, for lovely.
Thank you. Kia ora. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to listen to me talk about my research. I do know it can get a little noisy in here, so Shannon, if I get too quiet, can you tell me to be louder? So I'm really excited today. I get to share about my PhD research, which was titled Inviting Southeast Asian Young People to be Fully Known in New Zealand. And while this is a big research project, I'm kind of going to skip over the methodology stuff because it's not the most exciting, but if you want to talk about that, you're more than welcome to, but I don't really know why you'd want to. I thought I would start by saying why this research. So these are all me, spoiler alert. So I came to New Zealand at 2.5 years of age. I'm Filipino. And growing up in New Zealand was super interesting. I lived in Glen Innes, but I went to school in Wimuera, which is interesting. And then I moved down to the Waikato in Otorohanga. And then I went to possibly the widest high school in Hamilton. I won't say which one it is. I spent a lot of my childhood and my adolescence rejecting being Filipino because it was embarrassing. I wanted to belong, I wanted to fit in, and the only way to do that was to act white, whatever that looked like in those settings. And it was only until I got to university, as I finished my undergrad, I came to realize, hey, it's not too bad. I wonder if anyone else feels like that. Because of the environments I was in, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were Pākehā or people who look like me, but were all struggling with the same thing. So, I decided to do this research, and I'll share a little bit more about the background. But I guess I always think it's really nice to know where this came from. So it's a topic that's really close to my heart. So in terms of ethnic identity and well-being, we know that there are growing rates of mental health distress for our Asian young people across the world and also in New Zealand. And there's also a complex relationship between ethnic identity and well-being. So we know that for some people it can be really empowering and it contributes to positive emotional well-being. And for others it can lead, because they feel more connected to their ethnic identity, they experience more discrimination and things like that. So it's pretty complex. We know that there are various supports available for our young people. Being here, we know that there are lots of supports. There's mentoring services, there are school-based health services. There are lots of different things, but what we don't know is whether this is the kind of support that Southeast Asian young people need as they negotiate their ethnic identity. So I identified some research gaps. When you study a topic that's specific enough, you find quite a few. So I found that there was a lack of research for the population group that I was interested in, which was Southeast Asian young people, particularly those who were 1.5 or second generation, so those who grew up in New Zealand or were born in another country but moved here at quite a young age. And I also wanted to focus more on how we support these young people, because there was research that showed that, ethnic identity is a hard time, these young people struggle, and then that was kind of it. And there was something in me that I didn't want to go to young people and ask them to tell me their stories about their experiences and then be like, okay, thanks, bye. I really wanted to do something with the information that they gave me. So I chose to focus on supporting. So that was my research question, which is the biggest mouthful. How can 1.5 and second generation Southeast Asian migrant adolescents in New Zealand be supported as they negotiate ethnic identity? And in order to do that, I used what's called a mixed methods grounded theory. I used constructivist grounded theory. If you want to talk more about that, you can. I don't think my supervisors are here, so I don't have to share too much about that. But I used 2 different data sets in order to answer my research question. And the first data set was using secondary data from the Youth 19. and I focused on this particular population group, and I used measures of factors for like ethnic identity, so things like feeling connected to New Zealand, feeling connected to their country of origin, whether they could speak their language, whether they felt connected or whether they felt comfortable in settings of their culture or in New Zealand, European settings, and then did some data analysis with those, as well as looking at health and wellbeing outcomes like mental health, access to healthcare, things like that. And then I did some interviews with Southeast Asian adolescents, which was super fun and probably my favorite part of my PhD, just talking to these young people and hearing about their experiences of being a Southeast Asian young person in New Zealand. And I also talked to stakeholders, and I talked to those in the community who kind of broadly worked with young people or Asian young people, and then I used both those data sets to create a theory, which I'm going to spend some time sharing with you now. So hilariously enough, this took me like a year and a half to do, and it came out in one pretty picture that I can draw in 2 minutes. So the findings for my research is called The Theory of Inviting Southeast Asian Adolescents to be Fully Known. So what you have here is a diagram of how we can support these young people. So we know for the experiences of negotiating ethnic identity, they kind of sit on two ends of a spectrum, if you say. So the first one is being fully known, so that's when they feel really confident in who they are, they feel like they can make peace with the experiences that they have, they feel that they're connected to both their cultures, but also they feel like more than that, that there is kind of this third culture, or there's a sense of kind of creating your own culture or being Southeast Asian, whatever that means for you. And on the other end, it was a quote from a young person that really stood out to me and became the category title, which was "You're welcome, but also different." And in this category, it was really focused on, you know, you feel like you belong in New Zealand, but like not quite. Or you feel like you belong in the Southeast Asian culture, but like not quite. You're still like a little bit different. And with those experiences, then became, well, how do we support them? Because we know that this is something that they experience, and it's something they experience all the time, and will probably experience for the rest of their life. And it's something that will happen within a day. You can oscillate between the two. It's not like I always feel fully known all the time, you know, and so I can walk out the door and have an experience that's a bit different to what I had in here. So it's complex, and it changes over time. It changes for the person. So how do we support them? The first thing we have to do is validate their complex experiences. So I use the metaphor of the bridge because, as I noticed in my research as I was doing data analysis, is that when I talk to stakeholders and when I talk to Southeast Asian young people, the way they talked about their needs were slightly different, and the way that certain stakeholders, particularly those maybe in school-based health services, kind of talked about how they were taught to see need, wasn't always reflective of what young people said they were finding hard. And so I was wondering, well, if young people say that, you know, they're struggling with this thing, but it's not presenting the way that people are looking for, then they're going to be missed. So with that, I wanted to use the metaphor of the bridge to say, in order to be able to connect not only these experiences with one another, but also to connect stakeholders or those working with young people and the young people themselves, we have to validate their complex experiences. And this came from the fact that often, a lot of the time, these young people weren't feeling like their experiences were being validated with stakeholders. I had young people tell me that, you know, they'd go to a school counsellor and share something that they were going through, and a counsellor would laugh at them or dismiss them. So it's really important to validate their complex experiences and just to say, like, yep, I hear you and I see you, and not necessarily understand, but I can acknowledge this experience. And also ensuring that these invalidating complex experiences, to do that well, to make sure you're being culturally safe when you do so. And once and only once these validating complex experiences happen, so this is kind of the bridge or the foundation of the relationship between stakeholders and Southeast Asian adolescents or other adolescents, is cultivating connections with others. And that just means hanging out with people who look like you, being able to find familiarity with others. So young people talked about how it was really empowering for them to talk to older people who had gone through the same things that they did and had somehow made it through or were navigating it. and how it gave them, people to look up to, who maybe, for example, a lot of the young people that I talked to, they felt like the expectation for them was to be doctor, lawyer, engineer, in that order. It was the only thing that was quoted every single time with my young people. But to see other Asian young people or other Asians who look like them, who were teachers, who were doing other things, kind of encouraged them and showed them, like, oh, I could do this too, or there's another way. So that was all about cultivating connections with others, and this could be with friends, with teachers, with parents, with siblings, and with community organizations. And so that was like one way to kind of allow them to experience a sense of being fully known, feeling integrated within their sense of identity. And the other way to do that was to provide safe spaces. And in order for these spaces to be safe, they were inclusive. So inclusive of all the experiences of what it meant to be a Southeast Asian young person, because there are still differences between those who migrated at birth, or who migrated at 3 or 4 or 5, or who grew up here in New Zealand. The experiences are different if you grew up in East Auckland, where there's quite a lot of Southeast Asians, particularly Filipinos, to when you grew up in Otorohanga and you were the only Asian family of 3,000. So just being aware that being Southeast Asian looks different for all of those young people, and allowing them to share that experience, to validate that, and also that these spaces were intentional, that young people felt like this was a space that they were invited to that had some sort of value, or that it had been thought about. They weren't just kind of there as like a token or a tick box. And while validating complex experiences as the bridge, while we can provide safe spaces and not necessarily cultivate connection with others, or while we can cultivate connections with others but not have safe spaces, ultimately when we have all three of those, it's the strongest or the best way that we can invite these young people to feel fully known. So with all of that, these were just, I'm going to finish just with some implications, and I guess kind of what now? What can I do with this information? What can I do with this piece of research? So in terms for Southeast Asian adolescents and other minority adolescents, is it highlights the importance of validating the lived experiences. And I think sometimes, I know for me, it seems really obvious, like, oh, just listen to young people and maybe like don't gaslight their experiences. But it goes such a long way to have, like if you say, oh, this is something I experienced, I don't know how I feel whenever I notice I'm the only person that looks like me in a room. And to have someone say to you, yeah, that sounds like it would be really challenging, rather than like, oh yeah. It seems really straightforward, but things like that go such a long way for these young people, because often they experience more of the latter than they do the former. And it also advocates for culturally safe spaces, and that doesn't look like knowing what all the Southeast Asian countries are, or knowing how to say kumusta or kia ora. Like, it's knowing who you are and knowing what your cultural identity is, your ethnic identity is, and learning how being aware of your biases, your positionality in terms of how you relate to young people. When I talked to stakeholders, it wasn't enough that they just had gone on a kontiki to Vietnam at one time in their life, and that was really useful, and that's a really great starting point, but more needs to be done in order for these spaces to be culturally safe. You can't tell an Asian young person just to talk to their parents if they're having a hard time, because that's not really going to work. In terms for schools and service providers, schools are really a great physical environment to provide these safe spaces. So it also highlights the need for cultural safety training programs. It blew my mind that within school-based health services, there's not a lot of discussion around cultural safety training, or even with teachers, who see our young people every single day. And it also highlights the importance of co-design practices that go more than beyond the, what do you want? Yeah, sounds good. Nah, just kidding, we can't afford that. So actually meaningfully engaging with these young people, and it's not hard. You can already work with some of the things that you already do. And then for community organizations, it also highlights the need to continue providing resources that are created by other Southeast Asian or other Asian adults. A young person who wasn't Korean talked to me about the power of K-pop and how it made her feel a little bit more confident, because suddenly, being Korean was a bit more attractive than it was back in the day. And so things like Asian art is so important, because it shows young people that their experiences matter, And also it's, important to investigate the possibility of creating these formalised events for these young people, knowing that creating space for these young people doesn't take away from creating spaces for other minority adolescents. I think sometimes we fall into this space of like, well, we need to meet the needs of every single minority organisation or, young person, and it's really important that we have all those different spaces, but there are spaces for these young people too. And so I leave you, I guess, with what can you do? Can you validate complex experiences when you talk to these young people? Can you listen to them and say like, oh, okay, tell me more about that. Is it something you feel comfortable sharing? Okay, what do you mean by that? Asking them questions. Are you able to do your own work to be more culturally safe? Are you able to think about, oh, where are some of my biases? Where is my positionality? Oh, when a young person, tells me that their parents aren't home a lot because they have to work and that makes me judge the parent. Okay, why is that? Are you able to do the work? Are there spaces out there for you to do the work? Is there something within your organisation that can safely do that work? Are you able to cultivate connections? Can you reach out to those with similar experiences to you? Because inviting young people to be fully known isn't just for Southeast Asian adolescents, it's for all of us. So I know for me, having supervisors, having people in the research world who had similar experiences to me really helped me out during my research journey because I realized I wasn't alone and maybe I was going to make it. And think about how you can facilitate those connections. Who are the people that you know who would be great friends with each other? I know Shannon does a really great job of that because she knows everyone. How can you provide safe spaces? Can you share some of the community events that are happening with your young people? Can you encourage and empower them and maybe help them get funding to facilitate their own safe spaces? Can you invite them for a potluck? What can you do? I think sometimes when we think about this work, it's so much and there's so much that needs to be done and we need to do system changes and we need to be free of discrimination and racism and all those things are super important. But something I've been reflecting on is not only what do you oppose, but what do you stand for? And we stand for providing safe spaces for our young people. We stand for, and it doesn't have to be these massive, auditoriums filled with all these different people. It can just be, hey, let's have 5 of us, let's go out for a coffee and let's just talk. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just do something. Let's just go support Asian art and go watch all the cool plays that are coming out. Let's do all those sorts of things. So with that, I just want to say thank you. This is me and my dad, who looks like a teen dad even though he's in his 30s. And I think we must be in I don't know what we're doing, but she's reaching out and she's saying thank you because this is, I don't think my younger child would have ever thought I would be here. So thank you so much for listening. That's all. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Ali Mohamed from Thrive Foundation, speaking to us about refugee and migrant and rangatahi and the topic of identity. So I'd like to welcome up Ali Mohamed, please.
Inga mana, inga rio, inga iwi, iro rangatirama. Ko Pakistan tifinua ifano ma ai oho. Ko pepeyoya ikainga inaina. Ko Afghanistan titai fakapapa. Ko Manawatu tiawa. Ko Rohini timuanga. Ko Ali Mohamed Toko Ingoa, Norera, Tina Koto, Tina Koto, Tina Koto. Assalamu alaikum and kia ora koto. My name is Ali Mohamed. I just want to acknowledge the work that most of you do for our communities. There have been numerous youth workers that has contributed to the person that I'm today. So I really want to pay my acknowledgement for the work that you do. There are a few of the things that I do. A community activist, a youth worker, now a politician. That term is very scary. And also a football referee. There's been a few of the things that I do. But they are not the person that I am. I'm much more than that. My journey is not unique, but it mirrors the journey of so many young people around the world that experiences the same challenges, unfortunately, that I have gone through. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union, the Russia of today, decided to have an adventure in Afghanistan. And what they did, so of course our allies here in the West, the US, Australia, and the UK never wanted that to happen. So what they did was weaponize one group of ethnic people in Afghanistan with weapons. And that group that we now know as the Taliban terrorist group, who has been oppressing many ethnic minorities like the one that I belong to, Hazara. My parents were among the 3 million Afghan refugees that had to flee Afghanistan and had to seek refuge in many other parts of the world, including Pakistan, where my parents had to decided to flee. Life in Pakistan was never easy. I was born there. The constant abuse of human rights, from basic education to healthcare to clean drinking water. I still remember when I was about 5-year-old, my mother took me to all the primary schools in the area to enroll me into one of the schools. And they refused enrollment to me just because I was Afghan refugee. And that story and that journey still feels quite uncomfortable with me. But then came the golden opportunity to come to Aotearoa, New Zealand, under the refugee quota. While I was grateful for the opportunities that I was offered here, but everywhere that I went to, I was referred to as an Afghan. I've never thought about that, what actually that means. So what I did was I digged consistently in regards to my Afghan ancestry, while never been in Afghanistan in a single day while being born in Pakistan. And what Afghan meant was a question mark for me that I wanted to find some answers. When I Googled Afghanistan, nothing else came except war and negativity. So what I did, I was so ashamed of my own Afghan ancestry that I completely disconnected myself from my Afghan communities in Aotearoa, my Afghan culture, my Afghan language even. I thought the Pakeha way of living is the perfect way of living. That's what I thought for the second, or what the culture around me influenced me to take that decision. I thought that was one way of living was the right way of living. That had profound impacts on my health, including my mental health. I tried to fit into the Pakeha way, lifestyle. I just couldn't. I was in nowhere for almost 2 years. I went from a 50 kgs 16-year-old within 6 months later to 109 kgs. That's the impact of isolation that I was in. Just because I couldn't fit in, and then I had severe mental health issues, to the extent that I decided to take my life twice. And the one question that I frequently bothered me to make those decisions was, everywhere that I went to, the second question that people asked me after asking my name was, where are you from? I have massive issues with that question. I'm much more than where I belong at times. Get to know me first as a person before you getting to know my ancestry and my background around it. And my response always was, Palmerston North, or Palmy. It's always been a proud Palmy person, the unboring Palmy. Although I've always had the appreciation for my ancestral lands, Palmy is always, I feel, where I truly belonged. But the question around where are you from consistently posed a dilemma around me. Do people think, just due to my strong accent at times, or how fast I speak at times, don't think I'm not enough of a New Zealander? And at times, that was the dilemma that I was in under 3 years. Where is home to me? Where do I belong? Is it Afghanistan, where I've never spent a single day and is filled with negativity and war and crime? Or is it Pakistan, that was where I was born but had consistently have had abuse of human rights? Was it Aotearoa, where people at times don't even count me as one of them, or one of us, in fact. Identity is a powerful force that shapes who we are. As refugee youth, our journey to Aotearoa has been filled with challenges, as uncertainty and resilience. We have left behind the familiar and embarked on new chapters in our lives. Our identities have been shaped by our heritage, culture, and the courage it took to seek a safe future. It's vital that we embrace and celebrate our identities, for they are the very essence of our being. But identity is not just about our past. It's also about our present and the future. It's about the unique perspectives we bring to the table, the contributions that we make, and the dream that we aspire to achieve. We must recognize that our identities are multifaceted and rich, encompassing both our refugee background and our aspirations for the future. By honoring and empowering our identities, we can pave the way for a more inclusive Aotearoa that values diversity that we bring. Let me take you to a conversation that I had about 7-8 years ago with 11, 12-year-old young Wahine Afghan refugee. And I asked her the question, what is something that you want to achieve after you, probably in terms of career-wise, after finishing school, etc.? She said, I want to become a politician. That really amazed me, like, as a 12-year-old to say that. But she said, I think I will never be able to become one. There is no one that looks like me in that house in Wellington that looked or had the same journey as me. I don't reckon I would ever be able to be in that house. 6 months later, you elected your first ever refugee member of parliament in Gulris Garamand. And that was from the Greens Party. And then that's why I'm standing up this time around for your Greens Party as well. And that's why I always believe representation matters. Representation is crucial for refugees and marginalized communities. When we see individuals who share our backgrounds and experiences in positions of influence and power, it sends a powerful message that our voices matters. Representation matters because it gives us hope, inspires us to dream big, and show future generations that they too can overcome adversity and make a difference. It's often easy to feel invisible or marginalized in the broader narrative, but we have stories to tell, experiences to share, and ideas that can shape the world around us. It's essential that we see ourselves represented in positions of influence and decision-making, for that is when true change can occur. We need role models and mentors who understand our unique perspectives and journeys and can guide us towards achieving our goals. Inclusion is the glue that holds our society together. It's the understanding that we are all interconnected and that our differences can make us stronger. We must create spaces where all young people, including our refugee youth and other migrant youth, feel welcome, valued, and supported. Inclusion is not just a buzzword. It requires tangible actions. It means providing equal access to education, healthcare, and opportunities for employment. It means breaking down the barriers that hinders our integration into society. It means challenging the stereotypes and biases and fostering empathy and understanding. Together, let's build up in Aotearoa where every young person, regardless of their background, can thrive and contribute to their unique gifts. Let me tell you this. We are not defined by just our refugee status. We are individuals with dreams, aspirations, and immense potential. Our voices deserve to be heard, our perspective valued, and our stories celebrated. As we strive for a more inclusive and equitable Aotearoa, it is essential that we recognize the immense potential within our youth. We bring with us resilience, determination, and deep appreciation for the opportunities bestowed upon us. By embracing our identities, amplifying our voices through representation, and nurturing a culture of inclusion, I can unlock the transformative power of refugee youth. We can build a society where everyone has a chance to succeed, where diversity is celebrated, and our collective future is brighter because of our unity. Together, let's create a world where identity, representation, and inclusion are not just mere buzzwords, but lived realities. It starts with recognizing the strength and resilience of our young people and providing them with support and opportunities they actually deserve. It involves amplifying our voices, challenging the status quo, and advocating for policies and programs that promote equality and inclusivity. By embracing our diversity, we can truly unlock the potential for innovation, growth, and social cohesion. To any refugees listening today, I want you to know that you're not alone. You are a community of resilience, strength, and hope. Your journey may be difficult, but remember that you are capable of greatness. Embrace your heritage, celebrate your identity, and never be afraid to share your own story. In closing, I really want to take this opportunity to express my gratitude for the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of our young people. We are a community of resilient young people, diverse community with so much to offer to our communities. Let's embrace our identities, amplify our voices, and foster a culture of inclusion and acceptance. Together, we can build a future where every refugee are not defined by just their past, but their limitless potential that lies ahead. Kia ora, thank you, and may our collective effort lead to a brighter and more inclusive Aotearoa. Thank you. Thank you. And finally, hashtag Mega16. Thank you.
Our next presenter will be speaking to us about Takatāpui and Rainbow's young people's experiences and identity survey, sharing the key findings. So I would like to invite up, oh, wait a minute. John Fenaughty, have I said that right? Yep, perfect. All right, please welcome John to the stage. I lost your name in there.
Oh, don't worry, I know, in the millions that are there. Kia ora whānau, no airangi, roa ko ingarangi oku tūpuna, e tupaki hau e makara, me te whanganui atara, e te rohia iwe o te atiawa. Engari ko te motu wahiki, tōku kāinga nainei, o te rohi o te Ngāti Pāwa. Ko Fenaughty, roa ko Broad, oku whānau, ko Jill, roa ko Jack, oku mātua, really, they are Jack and Jill. Ko John, tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's John Fenaughty. I'm from a little place called Makara on the west coast of Wellington, which now has Kiwi, which is pretty exciting for those of you from that part of the world. But I now live on Waiheke, and I'm a cisgender Pākehā gay man. I use he, him pronouns. I am delighted to be here today to share some of the findings from Identify. I'm obviously not Alex, Mohamed, Tabby, Elizabeth, and Peter, Pooja, Patrick, and Jaime, but they are my colleagues and dear friends who have been involved in supporting this mahi. In terms of today, I'll just do a little brief acknowledgement, and then I'll go over some of the terminology that I'll be sharing, talk to you about what Identify is, and then provide a little bit of a summary about some of the key findings. What really probably meshes this session together is this idea of the complex realities that we're talking about and that idea of representation. In terms of acknowledgements, I really want to acknowledge my colleagues who have supported this work. This has been a co-production with Rainbow Youth and InsideOUT, as well as a bunch of academic researchers from around the motu. But really, without the young people, we wouldn't be able to be here today. And so I really want to acknowledge the young people who are able to support us to do this mahi. In terms of terminology for today, I'm just going to use this because terminology in the rainbow space is always evolving and changing, and it's really important just to kind of put some clear sort of description around what we're sort of meaning when we're saying some of these things. I'm going to be talking about Takatāpui and rainbow communities, and this broad umbrella is used pragmatically and collectively to include Takatāpui, Pacific Rainbow, including MVP, AFF+, and LGBTQIA+ identified people. So that's the kind of broad umbrella. And that includes people whose genders, sexualities, and variations in sex characteristics exist beyond cisgender, heterosexual, and endosex norms. There's caution required when using the word rainbow because it is very much a Western Pākehā concept, and I recognise that. So it is it's sort of pragmatic, but it also hides some of the complex realities that exist within this group. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm going to be talking about trans realities, and that is an umbrella and shorthand term for people whose gender differs to that they're assigned at birth. And at times we talk about non-binary people. And it's an umbrella term for people whose gender identity is not at either end of a gender binary. So not boy or man or girl or woman, and they may have a gender that is fluid. I'm going to be talking about disabled people, and I'm using a person first language with that, and those are people who are functionally disabled from participating in everyday life by at least one of the 6 barriers recognised in the Washington Group 6 survey. So, identify. Why am I here? Why am I talking about? Why do I have my rainbow shirt on? Because identify really came out of recognition for me. I'm privileged to be part of the Adolescent Health Research Group, ATC, and lovely, and I'm also part of the Counting Ourselves trans research project, trans healthcare research project in Aotearoa, and there's also Amazing Mahi, the Honour Project Aotearoa. These are all projects that either spotlight the lives of Takatāpui and rainbow communities, trans communities, or young people. But what they don't do is bring those two groups together. What are the complex realities for young people who are Takatāpui and rainbow? And we find that sometimes adult issues overshadow young people's issues, and when we're talking about surveys for majority cisgender heterosexual young people, they often don't understand things from a Takatāpui rainbow perspective. So that was why. Who? It was obviously a community and academic partnership with the 2 largest rainbow youth organisations, InsideOUT Kōaro and Rainbow Youth, and a range of researchers who come from a range of different identity positions. We hosted 9 community hui around the motu, which was fabulous, hearing from people about what they wanted to see included in Identify. It is a survey that really looks at some of the key domains of these young people's lives, and it includes young people both at secondary school as well as those up to the age of 26. And it was funded by the Faculty of Education and Social Work at Waipapa Te Mataurau, where I work. And we got ethics from the Health and Disability Ethics Committee to do a survey in Qualtrics. We did a bunch of recruitment in person and online on a bunch of places, and it was open from mid-February to the end of August. We literally opened the day that one of the lockdowns was announced. I don't know who else was at Big Gay Out that day, but it was, kind of anxiety-provoking when you're there and you're like, okay, it's just going to be announced. And I had a cold the next day, and I thought, oh my God, I hope I have not given multiple rainbow young people COVID. Turned out I didn't, which was good, but it also meant we had a larger recruitment period than we'd hoped because we had lockdowns. And that is part of the context for the survey, that it did happen through some lockdowns. But, I'm delighted to say that we had 4,784 young people who completed the survey, which is a phenomenal number of Takatāpui and rainbow young people in Aotearoa. We also had around 400 allies who are cisgender and heterosexual, and I'm not presenting their data here, but that's there if anyone wants to talk to me about that later on. In terms of the age distribution for the survey, we had a skew towards the secondary school kind of age group, which was great, but we also had really good numbers going right through up into the age of 26. In terms of ethnicities, we had 120 unique ethnicities recorded, including combinations of ethnicities. So that really highlights the complex realities that exist, that these Rainbow and Takatāpui young people are present across multiple ethnic groups. In terms of the survey, how it compares to the population base, the survey does err towards being more European and Pākehā, so there's an overrepresentation of that. But overall, there's some still pretty good representation, enough for us to do some specific analyses into particular groups. As we go through, I'll be presenting some of the recommendations that drop from this. And what we're really saying is that when I'm presenting some of these findings about the broader things, they will be hiding some racism that sits behind because we have that Pākehā European skew. And it's going to be really important that we do some future analysis around specific groups. And actually, colleagues Kyle Tan and Ritu Roy have done some specific work around Asian experiences. In terms of the survey, trans realities are part of Takatāpui and Rainbow young people's lives. 44% of the participants said that they were trans, non-binary, or identified with another gender. And a further 4%, so nearly 50% of the sample said that they were unsure and questioning of their gender. And when we're talking about gender, we just kind of tried to chunk down the most popular genders that were there. And we didn't include any genders that were less than 100 participants. And this really just gives you a sense, as people working with young people, about the variation that exists. These are hundreds of young people that identify with a range of ethnicities. Obviously, the binaries are more common, but there's a huge amount of variation all the way down. And you can imagine there were a lot more variation than this if we got down even further than groups of 100. We had to provide, we decided to prioritise people into gender groups so we could do some analysis around what was happening for trans and non-binary young people. And when we did that, we see that around sort of 35% of the sample identify as femme, either cisgender girls and women or as trans girls and women. And then there's about a quarter that are identifying as masc, either as trans men or as cisgender men, and then a really big chunk identifying as non-binary. So this kind of non-binary reality is absolutely pivotal to young people's experiences today. 1% of the sample said they identified as having variations in sex characteristics. And in terms of sexuality, queer was by far and away the biggest kind of grouping in the sample. But again, in terms of the variation that we see, we've gone way beyond the LGBT kind of group. We see that there's a much larger recognition around asexual identities, fluid identities, as well as the rise in young people identifying as Takatāpui, and some identifying as mostly straight, which is something that's quite interesting going forward. 6% of the participants said that they use languages specific to their culture to describe their gender and sexuality identity. So when we're doing stuff in services and when we're creating surveys and using official statistics, it's going to be really important that we think about how we enable those young people's identities to be seen and recognised. When we looked at how people were presented across the country in the survey, we see a really big skew to the big urban centres, which isn't surprising. Some other stats that we've got show that around a quarter of young people talked about moving town to feel safer as a Takatāpui or Rainbow person. So there's always a strong sense of urban drift. However, this slide really demonstrates that Takatāpui and Rainbow community, of course, are present across the motu. So in small, tiny towns to large urban centres, you'll find us. In terms of disability, nearly a half of the sample were identified as disabled, according to the responses on the Washington Short 6. And that really corresponds to findings from Youth 19, as well as the What About Me survey that show a high representation of disability for Takatāpui and Rainbow communities. It means that Takatāpui and Rainbow young people must be explicitly named, addressed and included in all of the work we're doing around disability and anti-ableist practices. It also means that with nearly half of the sample, that this is going to be a really important research topic going forward to find out about these intersectional realities. Dropping down a bit now, in the survey, nearly 2,000 of the participants were currently in secondary education, and some of them were in homeschooling or involved in alt ed, and a number were in private schools, and nearly 1 in 5 were at a faith-based school. Really positive finding that nearly 97, nearly all of them have told someone at school about their Takatāpui or rainbow identity. So these young people are feeling like they are willing to reach out to people about their identity. And on the whole, there are some positive stats around teachers expecting those young people to do well at school. But when we look at how well people said they feel a part of their school, we see really distressing numbers, with less than half of them saying that they feel like they're a part of their school. Again, really only half of them saying that they feel that their teachers care about them, and only a little more saying that they feel that they're treated with as much respect as other students. And it's that last one, I think, that is particularly concerning, because it gives us that comparative sense about their experiences in relation to cisgender heterosexual young people. Unsurprisingly then, just less than half of them said that their school was generally supportive of rainbow students. So it shows that half of our schools have a lot to do to produce environments that are supportive. And in terms of some of the quotes, because we provided options for people to write in quotes, one of the positive ones from a Pacific 14-year-old at Kaupapa Māori school said, "My current school is incredibly supportive and caring towards me and rainbow people." So it's great to see that some schools were amazing. Conversely, for this Māori student who's at a private mixed gender school, who was 17, "My school has zero support for rainbow communities, and the thought of actually coming out is scary." So we get this real sense of there's half of people are saying their school is supportive and half of them are saying it's not. When we ask them about how safe they feel as a rainbow and Takatāpui person at their school, only 12%, so nearly 1 in 10 of them said they feel very safe as a rainbow person at their school. Positively, nearly half of them said they feel very safe or safe, but a whole bunch of them say they feel neutral about this. They don't feel safe or unsafe. And when we think about this, what we actually want, and drawing on your whakaaro, Ali, is we want people to feel like they can thrive and be themselves. And clearly, our current situation is not enabling that to happen. So we need to really look at what we're doing to address the non-inclusive school climates that enable the microaggressions and bullying towards Takatāpui and rainbow students. Microaggressions are the small things that often don't meet the official marker for harassment, but nonetheless create a hostile environment for young people. We also see intersectional realities. So 21%, so 1 in 5 trans and non-binary students said school was unsafe or very unsafe, compared to 11% of cisgender Takatāpui and rainbow students. So we see this, double the amount of trans students saying that school is unsafe compared to cisgender students. And that was the same, ironically, the same stat for those who are disabled compared to those who weren't disabled. So we know that there's additional work and resources required to address the intersectional discrimination that these findings are showing us, including transphobic and ableist bullying in schools. A quarter of the trans and non-binary students were not allowed to wear the appropriate gendered uniform at school, which talks a lot to how we create environments that are welcoming for students, and what it means when we create uniform policies that don't enable people to feel like they belong. One student is Pākehā New Zealand European at a public single-gender school. "My all-girls school has been asked for over 5 years to provide pants or shorts for students in the uniform, however, they haven't." So it's not like students, these young people, aren't trying to advocate to get their needs met. These things have been in front of teachers and senior leadership teams for a long time, and still there's a lot of work to be done. We also included students, as I said, or young people that were outside of secondary education. And this is often a group that gets missed out because we focus a lot on schools, but it's actually important to think about what's happening for people in the post-secondary space. And we found that in the survey, 86% of them were at university and 10% were at Polytech. And we see more positive results for those in tertiary settings, post-secondary settings, with 80% of them saying that teachers expect them to do well, 70% saying they feel part of their course or program. But again, this 57% number of them saying that they're treated with as much respect as other students is hugely, hugely problematic, and really means that our post-secondary settings are still not doing enough to enable Takatāpui and Rainbow young people to thrive. For this person, it was positive. Being at university as a Rainbow person is really good, especially compared to high school. It was the first place I could be openly queer around other people and make friends with other queer people. And that talks to some of the comments, Lovely, you made around connection. Again, that ability to find supports from people like you. Nonetheless, at university, nearly 1 in 5 of those Takatāpui and Rainbow students said that they felt unsafe as a Rainbow person in their current place of study in the past year. And that's something that's incredibly concerning for universities. So the high proportion of Takatāpui and Rainbow students reporting being unsafe or harassed is a serious cause of concern and needs further investigation. I've done some other work involving photo voice with young people on my campus and who have talked about the problems with zero tolerance policies that say that there's zero tolerance for transphobia and homophobia, but in reality, when you look at what students need to do to report transphobia and homophobia, they really need to basically have been hate crimed at their university by a student for them to get anything, and they are expected to come out to the processes that do that. So we need to have a lot more thought around how we make post-secondary spaces safe. And then there are, of course, young people that aren't at secondary school, aren't in post-secondary education, but are in work and employment, or are seeking work and employment, or are unemployed. And of the survey, about 1,100 were in that boat. 75% were employed, and 25% were unemployed or job seeking. In terms of employment disparities, this is where, again, we see intersectional situations coming to the fore, where there's a larger proportion of trans and non-binary young people that were not in employment in this group, compared to the other groups. And we also see that for disabled and people compared to non-disabled people as well. That 57 number goes up by 2% to 59, where people can be themselves at work. But again, we see that disparity where transphobia is coming into workplace experiences. It's clear that all industry bodies need to ensure that work and employment policies and processes are responsive to the rights and needs of Takatāpui and Rainbow young people, especially trans and disabled young people. For trans and non-binary participants, nearly a third of them had delayed their transition because they were worried about being discriminated against as a Rainbow person at work. And for this person, Māori, who's 20 years old, I will not come out at work because I fear I will be harassed and my co-workers will stop respecting me. And one of the big things we talk about in youth development are the contexts in which young people live and where they are and where they learn and where they work. And sometimes it's easy to forget about workplaces, but workplaces can be really significant opportunities to interrupt some of the discrimination that they're experiencing. And in total, 4,166 participants answered the WHO 5 wellbeing questions. Those are the classic questions we ask around wellbeing. And only a quarter were found to say that their wellbeing was very good or good. And that number is staggeringly low compared to other youth samples. Concerningly, over half of them had reported non-suicidal self-injury in the past 12 months, and 17% of them had said who needed healthcare in the past 12 months were not able to access it. So to me, one of the obvious things that talks to those of us working in school-based health places and as well as in post-school, secondary school health services is the recognition that we've got a lot of Takatāpui and Rainbow young people that are in these environments, and these health services are going to be a critical lever for us to ensure that Takatāpui and Rainbow young people are getting access to the health resources that they need. 72% of participants had told family or whānau about their rainbow identity, so that's also another really positive number. Young people are disclosing in large proportions, and when some participants talked about this, and for this Māori 19-year-old, my whānau was generally unfazed due to the fact we have other members of the Takatāpui community within the whānau. So lots of really positive statements were made about whānau as well. I'm now just going to provide some general recommendations because there's so much in here. I could literally talk for a whole day on some of the findings, but there is a report link which I'm providing at the end. But I did want to kind of end with some overarching things because I think sometimes those are the bits where it's easy to think about what we can do. I think it, and I know I'm terrible because I'm super deficit because I'm an inequities researcher, and I totally acknowledge that. But I do want to recognise there are some really positive findings. These are really brave young people that are doing their best. They're advocating to get their needs met where they can. They're participating in community surveys. And many of them are out and they have some positive supports across at least one of their key demographic environments. So we do need to celebrate and enhance those supports when they occur. But we do need to recognise that this group is facing an enormous amount of challenge. And they are facing stuff which is just not acceptable and actually is preventable, particularly around bullying and harassment and exclusion. We know that Takatāpui and Rainbow and Māori Rainbow young people are facing additional challenges and prejudices compared to Pākehā Rainbow young people. And I think these, for me, the findings really highlight that necessity of enhancing Takatāpui and Māori Rainbow well-being in relation to Te Reti o Waitangi, particularly in relation to Rititanga and Tino Rangatiratanga for rangatahi Māori. So we are really, this is a treaty issue. We're seeing disparities for rangatahi Māori that need to be addressed. We also see significant issues for trans, non-binary and disabled participants, so that intersectional minority groups within minority groups, and we need to recognise those groups in any work we do. We also saw some disparities for Pacific and Asian participants. We saw, for instance, I haven't gone into that in detail, but there was higher amounts of foregone healthcare, so young people who needed healthcare who couldn't access that for Pacific and Asian participants. And we need to really recognise that combination of ethnicity and racism in policy and practice. Intersex young people remain absent in the research, and the census is great for at least putting intersex realities out there, but it's clear that this is a group that requires significant additional resourcing. This survey was for Takatāpui and Rainbow young people, including those who identified as intersex. There are a lot of intersex people who don't identify as being part of the Rainbow community, and so there's really a specific need for intersex specific research. The high levels of mental health distress, and I didn't present some of the other stats there in the full report, really talk to the stress that's produced by exposure to widespread discrimination and structural discrimination. And that is compounded by poor healthcare provision for this group, including gender-affirming healthcare, and there's a lot of data in the full report about access to gender-affirming medication or lack of access to it. So we really need to look at how we can improve healthcare access and healthcare experiences for trans and non-binary young people and for marginalised groups within Rainbow communities. But I also kind of do go on about this a bit. When we're talking about healthcare access, we do need to recognise that that still is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and actually there's all of this stuff, and the survey highlights all of the stuff that's happening at the top of the cliff that we need to address to stop a burden really falling on healthcare services and providers to address the mental health issues that are produced by the enormous amounts of discrimination and oppression that these young people are facing. There's been a call, there are multiple calls for us to do joined up work, and it's clear that this joined up need is also apparent for Takatāpui and Rainbow young people who are facing disparities in all of the key domains of their lives across different population groups. When we do that though, we need to recognise that there is complex realities and different intersectional experiences, and we need to make sure we've got a lens on those groups. I would recommend that you follow us on Instagram and that you download the community advocacy report on the survey website for more detail. And I'm just going to end with one quote. It's quite a long one, so it's over 2 slides. We asked young people at the end of the survey to share any hopes and dreams they have for Rainbow young people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this person said that they may see themselves represented in all fields, sciences, arts, professionals and trade, that they will be supported, will have access to safe, affirming medical and psychosocial and spiritual support and intervention, that they will be able to experience and express their identity in any way and feel safe, that their rainbow identity will be important and not the only important thing that they have. And that was from a 15-year-old Māori participant. Kia ora.
And I'd like to invite Lovely and Ali up for a question and answers time. So we've got about 8 or 9 minutes for some questions. So if there is anybody out there that has a question for one of our speakers, please put your hand up and I'll come running out and they can answer any questions that you might have. Awesome. I'll just come running over to you.
Kia ora, Lovely, John and Ali. Thank you, just such fabulous knowledge. Thank you for sharing with us. I have a question for Ali, and it's about what helped you, what supported you to move from a place of poor mental health, from a place of feeling really lost, to where you are now? What supported that for you?
In terms of my experience, when I was about 16, I was really struggling. I managed to find a football, so I referee football, and I think, so I decided to take up on, I saw ad on Central Football's Facebook that they're trying to recruit more referees, and I joined this refereeing group, and at the time there was about 6 of us referees that used to train, and the other 5 referees that was training at the time was all of them are FIFA referees that has refereed in Olympics and the World Cups and all of the mega tournaments, etc. So, and being able to around them and see what does those opportunities looks like, what does the other side actually looks like, and for like when I was struggling at the time in terms of my physical well-being, like as soon as if I used to miss a training session, they would give me a ring, to be honest, like, hey Ali, I just saw your training today, everything is good. So we need more people like that around us, to be honest, to be able to just give us a head up in our shoulders and say like, how are you today? And so I think like today, the person that I'm today, I think all of my kudos goes to some of my biggest mentors, like to name a drop, like Matthew Conger, Mark Rule, Edward Cook, Anthony Riley, and they've been such a support still to this day. To be honest, I feel such an immense proud being able to train with them, like week in, week out. Like usually I see them on TV only, but now it's like having people like that has been tremendous. So yeah, so be with that person for someone else out in your community. There are people that are needing for you to be someone in that capacity, and that's what I've been trying to do in the last couple of years. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Is there anybody else that has a question for any of our speakers today? Oh, I'm getting my steps in today.
Kia ora. It's another question for Ali, but you all might have some comments. Recently heard Paul Spoonley talk about Auckland being the fourth most diverse city in the world, and a challenge to us about how we balance our commitment to Māori with how we balance our commitment to multi-national city. And I've really been struggling to envisage how we do that. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how you see the refugee migrant population sitting within our kind of bicultural framework and how they can support each other.
Sure. I think the perspective that I usually have is around the first aspect is all of us are human beings. And I think that is kind of the element that we probably need to. But in terms of policy-wise, the communities that you sort of mentioned, we all have unique challenges at times. But there are some challenges that are probably that connects with our communities as well. So I think the opportunity that sits alive is we need to be able to work together in our systems at times. And I really want to name drop an organization that works very well in that space is Mixit, and we've got a representative for Mixit as well. So, and the work that they do at times, they work with our refugee young people, with our migrant young people, with our multi-ethnic young people, but their spaces are always open for anyone else to come into their space because they understand at times that the challenges that exist just does not exist for one community. So I think from where I'm trying to get to, there are times that we definitely can work in partnership to find those opportunities to be more equitable at times. Hope that answers the question.
Just to add, it was actually a question that came up in my defence. I also think it's really important to acknowledge that as migrants and refugees, we have a commitment to ensure that we meet the obligations of Te Tiriti. And so it's really important for us that we don't forget that, and that at the end of the day, meeting that obligation is probably one of the most important things that we do here, because we live in New Zealand and it's really important to acknowledge and participate and amplify the voices of Māori, and to ensure that if there are spaces where, I don't actually think we're always the best people to answer that question, we should be inviting Māori to answer that question for us, not for us to say, oh, well, we think this. Well, actually, why don't we just ask them and engage with them, because they know what they want, they have the voice, and in spaces where we get invited to have that conversation, I think it's also important for us to invite them along and to make sure that their voices are being amplified alongside our own.
Sorry, I want to apologize. I thought you meant Ali rather than Lovely, so I want to apologize for saying that.
I've got one. Just one last thing. Of course, as Pākehā, we're also migrants too, right? So there is that kind of recognition about, that we, as treaty partners, we all have that role to play too.
Kia ora. I've got one for you, Lovely, and one for you, John. Right here.
Hi.
Yeah. Lovely, you mentioned about going to the widest school, I think, in Hamilton. I've worked in schools in Dunedin previously, and a question for you is, do you find that because of the structural violence and discrimination, lower decile schools, because of the young people they have to deal with daily being Pacifica, Māori, and ethnic, have better treatment and better outcomes for ethnic young people? Yes or no, and please expand. And for John, I think in some of the research, I think in the quotes, and maybe that's just random, but some of the positive comments came from young people who are Māori and kura kaupapa. Do you think, because of the cultural aspect of community, is that more common in the research and came more in comparison to other ethnic groups, mainly Pākehā? Thank you.
Those are great questions, thank you. I think from personal experience, not only was the school that I went to quite a high proportion of Pākehā, but it was a private school. There's only one private school in Hamilton, so I'll leave that to you. Yes. And I think because of that, the structure, the way this, the system is structured to work for Pākehā, and it, even in just little things, well, not little things, like for the prefects of my year, we had one token Asian, who was one of my friends because she played cricket. and she was Sri Lankan. And then we had the other token Māori, we had a token Pacific, we didn't even have a token Pacific, and then we had the other token Asian who was our international prefect. So there were one of two Filipinos, things like that. You know, those little microaggressions that do make you question, like, oh, am I just being sensitive? My name was constantly pronounced wrong. You know, you would get all these little... So I think potentially if in schools that maybe pay more attention to ethnic and cultural identity, I just so happened to be in an environment where they didn't see that that was something they needed to focus on. I think also it's important to pay intersection to, you know, I went to a private school and we were not private school money people. My parents just worked really, really hard. And so not only was it really kind of jarring to be in an environment where everyone around me looked very different, but their lifestyles were so different. You know, I remember being in year 12 and one of the girls in my school talked about how she went to Fiji on holiday with her boyfriend. And I was like, cool, I hung out in Otorohanga with my like 7-year-old brother because I'm not allowed to talk to boys. You know, like not only, you know, those experiences were just so different at that school. That I think, yeah, so I think a little bit more research and just kind of storytelling and around those experiences, because it is those intersections which can be like doubly jarring. But I would like to think that maybe I'm just being idealistic, but hopefully schools can begin to recognise that. And I do think some schools do a really great job. I don't know if those schools exist, but I'd like to think they do, and it would be really cool to hear from them.
Kia ora, thank you for that amazing question as well. And I think there's not enough data specifically to kind of do a kura kaupapa analysis, but I guess the working kind of thinking I'd have is that, you know, kura kaupapa represents part of that post-colonial kind of movement and that decolonising focus, and colonisation is the reason in Aotearoa for homophobia and transphobia. And so my hope that would be that where we see decolonisation movements increasing, we'll see less homophobia and transphobia because of that across the broader society. That would be my hope. But also recognising that it really is about the individual culture of the kura that's important. And there's, yeah, so it's sort of positive signs kind of thing, but part of that broader decolonisation kind of process, I reckon.
Cool. We've got time for just one more question.
Yeah, thank you so much to give me an opportunity to ask a question. I was really glad to hear your story, Ali, and I don't know if it's an appropriate question for you or not, but I totally relate to your story because I'm also a former refugee. I'm from Pakistan. I came into this country last year. I'm working in Nelson with New Zealand Red Cross with youth. And as working with youth and getting to know them closely, I get to know that most of the refugee youth and young lads, they wanted to contribute themselves for the country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, because they've been through a lot. Personally, we've been through a lot in our country, and the country we've been as asylum or refugees. And we got so many different innovations, and we got different skills that we didn't get any chance to show up, because in our journey and in a new country as well, we think because we are refugees and this is not our land, how are we going to contribute to this country? Are we belong to the country where we came from, or the country where we had our journey, or the country where we are now? Is there anything the government or any organization is working on that, where refugees specifically come up and contribute and find a path to contribute in a government side?
Sure. Yeah, I completely touch over there as well. I think in New Zealand we have built walls for our communities to be able to participate. There has been some of our systems are so racist at times in regards for us to be fully participate. Like, for example, most of our driving licenses are actually not acknowledged here in New Zealand. Most of our qualifications are not acknowledged in New Zealand. For example, I know that people has got degrees in aviation that is not acknowledged in New Zealand. Most of our skills that we commit times consistently gets ignored. So I think that's where the Greens Party, we have consistently advocated, not being partisan, but that's why within our political front, I think we need to allow people to be able to showcase rather than building bridges in front of them so they can't really get into because as I completely agree with you, we have seen the worst, to be honest. We consider Aotearoa to be our homes now, to be honest. We want to be able to contribute to this economy because around us, the hypothesis that I consistently sit within the political spectrum, we are usually told that, oh, you guys just always on benefit. We don't want you to be people into the country. We consistently face this sort of barriers into my face all the time. So I think, as I previously said, we need to work with our government in regards to who is in place, in regards to ensure that we've got systems in place that assist people to get into workforce and education rather than putting walls and barriers in front of them. Hope that answers the question.
I have one more question. Thanks for your presentation today for all of you. My question is there any organization or anything that would make the women refugee their voices to be heard because they find it very hard to express their feeling and also if there is any way they can, give back to the community, which is New Zealand. Is there any organization out there for all of you?
Yeah, like for example, in Tāmaki Kōaro, we got Mixit, who has been advocating in that space for decades now. So, and then we got Refugee Survivors New Zealand in Tāmaki, and then in Wellington, you got a couple of organizations that have existed to be able to advocate on behalf of most of the refugee communities, so you can work in partnership with them to be able to voice out some of the frustrations and issues that exist out in our communities at times. So, and also the other thing that I also be in touch with your local MP, to be honest, all the time, because they are your voice in Parliament who makes the decisions on your behalf at times. Keep them accountable for the decisions that they make at times. So I think in terms of we can make a lot of voice, we all need to be advocating on our behalf in terms of the policies that they make at times. That's what I've been so passionate about, because there is not a lot of people that looks like us in that house in Wellington that can advocate on behalf of that. And hopefully now we have had 2 members of Parliament of refugee background, Guldis Garaman of the Greens Party and Ibrahim Umar of the Labour Party, but we need more people in regards to be able to understand where we come from and have policies that are inclusive rather than putting walls and barriers in front of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone who asked questions. And I'm sorry if you had a question, we didn't get round to it, but please feel free to come and speak to our speakers if you do have questions. And yeah, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to speak to you one-on-one. But again, I want to thank you all for coming to the session today. And another thank you very much to our incredible speakers for leading us in this breakout and sharing their knowledge and experience with us. So just a big round of applause again for our amazing speakers today.